everybody, it's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS fades and sleepers for this week's Wells Fargo Championship. This is arguably the most important video of the week. We have ownership out on Wednesday, which means one thing. We got to talk about the chalk and, of course, some of those diamonds in the rough, our sleeper picks that we'll be targeting in our GPPs. The goal here, of course, is to try and avoid some of those popular plays that I don't necessarily see coming through here, and, of course, to try and uncover some of those lower-owned leverage plays to help you in these large field contests. The whole goal here, or I guess the whole perspective here, is for these large field, maybe 50K to first, 200K to first contests, where you're having 50 to maybe 80,000 other people to play against. In these type of contests, game theory becomes an important aspect of your DFS experience. So that's why here on Wednesday, after we've gone that ownership, it's matured a little bit, we're able to go ahead and make some of these decisions. With that being said, let's go ahead and hop right on into it. Alright guys, hopping right on into it. Our first fade is going to be Rory McIlroy at $11,500. And anytime somebody's going to be 25, maybe even 30% owned, like Rory's going to be this week, you're always going to have to consider them as a fade, but especially when the golf course doesn't fit their skill set, especially for one of these elite level drivers of the golf ball that gets it done with his distance over his precision. This is not one of those venues. I mean, you got 3 to 4 inch Kentucky bluegrass rough, which is nothing to sleep on, and you're also dealing with greens that are relatively small. Now, Rory McIlroy, if you take a look at his shots gained metrics over the last 24 measured rounds, has been pretty solid on approach. You can see gaining right around a third of a stroke per round. That's why a lot of the industry is hopping in on the bandwagon, and why he's going to be 30, maybe even 35% owned, depending on what contest that you're in. Now, if we take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, right, take a little bit, if you zoom out, you see the problem, right? He's losing to the field with his approach play, and that includes the last 24 measured rounds there. He's a gainer, a third of a stroke gainer to the field. So, of course, there's a few red flags right there with his game, but also with the off the tee play. This .72 shots gained per round is all with the distance. And at this venue, I would expect Rory McIlroy to have to lay up off the tee at least 6 or 7 times, if not more, depending on how these holes are set up. So in general, I don't expect this to be a place where he can leverage his usual skill set, which is bomb and gouge. You know, even though he's not the best wedge player in the world, just set up so many wedges that even if he's hitting them the 10 to 15 feet, he's going to shoot something in that 4 to 5 under range. This is a golf course, particularly for somebody like Rory, who will be teeing off early in the morning tomorrow. In fact, before 8 a.m. local time there, going to be dealing with 17 to 20 mile an hour wind gusts for much of his round. Anytime you have an elite level player playing in the harder of the two draws, his skill set doesn't really translate to that golf course, and he's still chalky. Going to be somebody that I'm actively looking to fade. So I'm going to have 0% Rory McIlroy this week. After having the 80% of Jon Rahm last week, it feels a little bit balanced, right? You know, you got to take the chalk one week, maybe fade it the next week. That's what I'm going to be doing with the most expensive player on the slate. Next up, we have Keegan Bradley here at $9,600, and he's coming in nearly 20% owned, 19.8%, and that is despite being $9,600. I mean, that is far too high of a price tag for Keegan Bradley, and I don't care what kind of recent form he's coming in with, right? He can look as good as he has at the Zurich Classic. Again, that's a team event, right? So he's only 50% of that finish. He looked decent at the Valero Texas Open. I mean, even at the Players Championship, a few events before that in Florida, where we also rode him through quite a good stretch of form. He's always been like that. He's always been that flash in the pan that can disappear just as quickly as he appears on the scene. And at this type of venue, seemingly makes sense with his ball striking, right? He's relatively accurate off the tee, pretty decent on approach. But you can't tell me that he's going to be one of the highest owned players on the slate. $9,600 in a good idea. I mean, there's a reason why we have a phrase called going full Keegan. This guy is an absolute madman, an experience to go out there and roster in DFS. And anytime he's going to be chalk, he's almost always going to be a fade for me. He's just far too volatile for my liking. And even though we are looking for volatility in these large field GPPs, I am much more willing to stomach that with Keegan when he's in the $8,000 range, you know, most of the time in the $7,000 range, and also in that single digit, maybe 10% owned range. You know, not when he's going to be 20% owned plus. In some of the higher dollar contests, might be closer to 25, 30% owned. Just not something that I'm actively looking to get myself involved with. I'd much rather pivot elsewhere. There's guys in this range that I like a whole lot more, most notably guys like Russell Henley, who's actually cheaper than Keegan Bradley and also coming in with lower ownership, or of course guys like a Gary Woodland or even Patrick Reed. And you guys know how much I hate Patrick Reed. I'm willing to play him even over somebody like a Keegan Bradley. You guys know that something is going on there. Next up, we have Paul Casey as our last fade, and this isn't so much about skill set or about ownership, to be quite frank with you. You can see he's only 9.3% owned, so one of the lower owned quote-unquote fades that I have, but I just want to make sure I get this point clear. He's playing injured. He had to withdraw from the Masters. You only withdraw from the Masters if you're dealing with legitimate issues, and for Paul Casey at $8,800, there are guys I like a lot more around him. One of those is Patrick Reed, like I just said, who, that makes me want to puke a little bit, but this is a course that should play decent for him. And down here, guys like Sergio, Max Homa, Siwoo Kim, Seamus Power, Jason Day, these are some of my favorite plays on the slate. So for me, somebody like Paul Casey, who we have these injury concerns about, just 2 to 3 weeks ago, I had to withdraw from the Masters. I don't see a reason to push it. I don't see a reason to risk it with his back injury. He could very easily withdraw from this event. It would not surprise me at all. So make sure you're keeping an eye on that. He does have an afternoon tee time, so might not withdraw until after lock, unfortunately. But I'm not going to have any exposure there, right? I'm not going to expose myself to that type of risk. Just unnecessary when you have all of these solid plays around him. So going to be a fade there. And I'm not really going to look into it more than that, right? That's the only reason I'm fading him. From a skill set perspective, pretty decent course fit, right? Relatively accurate off the tee, decent on approach, played well at the Players Championship. It's actually a comp course I will give here to TPC Potomac, and it's not because it's a TPC style golf course. It's because it's a precision first type of golf course. So regardless of the skill set fit, I just cannot involve myself with that type of injury concern, and that's why he's going to be out of all of my lineups. And next up, we have the sleeper picks. So those were the higher owned plays, or some of the more notable plays that you should avoid. These are some of the lower owned leverage plays that I'll be going to. So one of them in the 8K range that I absolutely love here, going to be Siwoo Kim at $8,400. And he's one of these 8K guys that has a ton of upside. These guys are priced appropriately. They all have the skill set that we're looking for and are all coming in with good recent form. So not a surprise that I'm playing almost all of them here on the slate, but most notably with Siwoo Kim, a winner at the Players Championship, loves these positional type of golf courses like PGA West. We've seen it at Sedgefield Country Club, one of my comp courses that I'm using here. Almost every comp course in my modeling this week, he has a top 5 or a top 10 finish at. So in terms of skill set, we know it should very much so translate to this type of venue. He can be precise off the tee. He's one of the best approach players in the world when he's firing on all cylinders. And it's really going to come down to the putting. I mean, if we take a look at the recent form metrics, you'll see that it's very consistent off the tee and on approach. And even with the putter and around the green, right around the neutral, he just needs to find that putter for a round or two. Go out there, gain 2 or 3 strokes to the round with the flat stick, and that's going to be enough for him to finish in the top 10. So in terms of a DFS upside, I think it's there, right? It's going to come down to that flat stick. Just sets up perfectly for the guy. I'm surprised he's only 11.7% owned, so maybe a little bit higher owned than most of these sleeper picks I usually go to, but given the upside, I would have expected it to be in the 18 to maybe even 20% owned range. If it were up to me, he'd be one of the highest owned plays in this range. So somebody I certainly am going to have plenty of leverage on. Next up, we have Matt Kuchar at $7,900. Somebody who the recent form has been amazing for. He's number 10 in the field in terms of recent form, but also I expected him to be much more popular than just 10.8%. He's somebody who's known for being better at these short tracks, par 70s, where it's all about the precision more than the power, and I would have expected him to be 16 to 18% owned. He's coming in against 8% a little less owned than that, at least per my projections. And if he's going to come in with the recent form that he has, I'm going to be all over him. So first and foremost, if we take a look at that, I'm up here at $7,900. He's losing off the tee right around neutral on approach, which isn't all that bad in my opinion, but gaining around the green and gaining a ton with the putter. The one thing about his off the tee play is most of it comes with the driving accuracy. So even though he's been losing of late, he does get a positive in my model because he's one of the most accurate drivers of the golf ball. Distance isn't going to be a factor here. And the approach play has been solid in the 125 to 150 and the 150 to 175 yard range. He struggles with the longer irons, right? Because he's older, he doesn't have all that distance, all that firepower that he used to. He tends to struggle the longer away he is from the hole. This week, that is not a factor. He can lean into that putting that he's been on absolute fire on over the last few months, lean into the strong part of his approach play, which is that 125 to 175 yard range, and hit a ton of fairways this week. So I expected him to be much more popular than he was. That's why he wasn't somebody I put as a core pick this week. But at that type of ownership level, certainly somebody I'll have plenty of leverage on. And lastly, we have Kevin Streelman at $7,700. Another player, he's been decent of late, right? He's been making some cuts, posting some decent finishes, and last week was relatively chalky. So this week, I expected him to also be nearly 20% owned, especially if we take a look at the recent form. You can see for Streelman has been pretty darn solid, right? 67th at Mexico, right, made the cut. Missed cut at the RBC Heritage was a little bit surprising, but Valero Texas Open, during the Florida swing, this guy was a made cut machine, and as a result, the shots gain metrics are very consistent. He's gaining across all 4 major categories, which in this field, there's only a few players that can say that, and most of them are priced above $9,500. Kevin Streelman, on the other hand, off the tee, we know he's a precision guy more than a power guy. So to see him gaining more than half a stroke per round just shows you how accurate that he's been. The approach play used to be a negative. In fact, a few weeks ago, he was a fade for us because he was losing to the field with the irons, but clearly has turned that around, so much so that over his last 24 measured rounds is now a gainer to the field in that category. So the fact that he's turned that around has been solid across the other 3 categories for quite some time at this point. If he can ride that momentum with the irons, I'd expect him to have, once again, another solid showing. It's a course that plays into his precision. The shot gain metrics look decent, and I'm quite frankly surprised, guys, that some of these guys are lower owned, like a Streelman, like a Kuchar, also like somebody like a Siwoo. They should be 10 to maybe even 15% higher owned than they are. And if they're not, going to be people that I'm taking advantage of this week. All right, that's all I've got for the fades and sleepers. Before you hop on out of here, let me know down in the comments who you're fading and, of course, who your biggest sleeper pick is. I appreciate all your comments. I appreciate all the support. Make sure you smash the like button as well if you haven't already. We're going to have our weekly DFS live stream tonight. That'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern time, so make sure you set a reminder, you stop on by for that. A link will be in the description to this video to that live stream to set a reminder. There we'll be covering the weather, my projections, player pool, any of your live questions, most importantly, to get you prepared for the slate. We'll make some lineups together, we'll talk some strategy, all that sort of fun stuff. So make sure you guys stop on by. I'm looking forward to it. Make sure to bring any questions that you have as well. Until next time, guys, best of luck with all of your lineups, any outright bets that you'll be placing for this golf tournament, and let's get this cash.